Micha Feldmann was born in the land of Israel in 1944, and he was head of the Jewish agency mission to Ethiopia and was Israeli consul there as well. He took part in Operation Solomon that in 1991 succeeded in bringing out of besieged Addis Ababa in one weekend more than 14,000 Ethiopian Jews. Currently, Micha serves as the director of the Ethiopian department within SELA, an organization which is the Israel Crisis Management Center that helps new immigrants from Ethiopia and the former Soviet Union. So without further ado, Micha Feldmann.
We use that because of
Yes, we may have to lower it.
not because of I have a very strong voice. Shalom and thank you for inviting me. I don't like to stand behind the desk, but maybe you need it. This is away?
I think the way now it's your voice.
Okay. No. I want to speak. All right. Okay. Now it's better. And if you don't hear me, raise your hand. Okay. Thank you for inviting me. Whenever I have the opportunity to speak, no matter what the subject is, I start with something which is for me very important to convey to as many people as possible, not only in Israel but all over the world. You could call it the Zionism of the Ethiopian Jews. And I think the best way to make you understand who really the Ethiopian Jews are is just the best way to do it is to take you with me on my first visit to Ethiopia. 1986, January 86. I've been already for 3.5 years in charge of the absorption of the Ethiopian Jews within Israeli society in the framework of the Jewish agency. When my boss came and she said, now is the time for you to go to Ethiopia. My first trip to Africa at all, we landed 2:30 a.m. at Nairobi airport, and within 5 minutes I understood that I was in Africa. Most of the people around me were black. And then for 2 days I had the opportunity to walk through the streets of Nairobi. And those who have been to Africa, south to the Sahara, know that I'm not exaggerating when I'm saying that tens of thousands of people were running around. You don't know where they come from, where they go to, but you understand that you are in the midst of Africa. And then I fly to Addis Ababa, the capital of Ethiopia. 5 minutes after landing, I know that I'm in the midst of the heart of Africa. An American Jewish group joins me, and the next day, it's already Friday, we fly from Addis Ababa to Gondar, a city in the north, where at that time, I remind you, January 86, still most of the Jews of Ethiopia lived in villages around that city. We get out of the airport, and outside the airport, it's about noon. Then, with 3 letters on it, NTO waits for us. NTO means National Tourist Operation. This is the operational arm of the Ministry of Tourism, and this van takes us, a group of white people, very visible in Ethiopia, from the airport to a small Jewish village, 5 kilometers north of the city of Gondar. At the end of the city, the tarmac ends, and we go down a dirt road. And all of a sudden, we see a group of boys and girls, 15, 16, 17 years old, coming up the same way. Those are the children of the village, dressed in a school uniform, going to the afternoon shift of the high school of Gondar. The moment they see us, white people in this tourist van, they know that we are on our way to their village. They forget about school, they turn around, and through a shortcut over the hill, run back to the village. We arrive together. We are now standing in front of a hill with 30 huts. This is the village of Walaka. And here in the midst of the heart of Africa, a surprise happens to us. Those children with their big black eyes, very thin, approach us, open their mouths, and they speak Hebrew. And they say to us, Shalom, my name is so-and-so, what is your name, and where are you from? And then they take us by the hand up the hill to the synagogue of Walaka. Now the synagogue of Walaka is about the size of a quarter of this room, not bigger. A tin roof, a Magen David on top, and at the entrance stands the last Jewish monk. Yes, there were monks in Jewish Ethiopian history, at least for 400 years. He is the last one. He passed away about 16 years ago in Ashdod. He is in charge of the synagogue, and I approach him, and I try to shake his hand, as you do in Ethiopia. You shake with your right hand, you support with your left hand. He reacts like an ultra-Orthodox woman in Mea Shearim. He's a monk. He has never been with a woman. He's never eaten meat. He lives on dried chickpeas, fresh vegetables, and water. And maybe I did something wrong and I couldn't purify him. So he steps back and puts his hands away. But then he points at the door and invites us in. And inside the synagogue are now standing those children who ran back from their way to school in a row, in a line. He gives them a sign, and they start singing a Hebrew song so much out of tune that I couldn't recognize it. I don't know if you remember the first time you listened to authentic Ethiopian melodies. The harmonies are so different from what we are used to that it hurts your ears. The same happened to them. Someone came from Israel, tried to teach them a Hebrew song. It hurt their ears, they sing out of tune. But then I recognized the song by the words. And symbolically, those children are singing the song, Mezarei Yisrael Yikabtzenu. I don't have to translate for you. And then, Evenu Shalom Aleichem, some other songs. And then the monk comes to me and says, tomorrow is Shabbat, please come to the prayers. We come a bit late. The men are already sitting on benches along the walls. The women are listening from the outside. They pray in Hebrew, so it's easy for us to join Shacharit Shel Shabbat. And then comes the big moment when they take out of a wooden box, not an ark, the only Torah that they have. They put it on a very simple table. And without any warning for me, the monk points at me and says, you are from Jerusalem, you read the Torah. I said to him, listen, I'm not so familiar with reading the Torah the right way. He says, no argument. You are from Jerusalem, you read the Torah. So who am I to argue with the commander of the synagogue? I don't know which weekly portion we are in. So I go to the Torah. They open the Torah for me, and to my surprise, I find my mafia on the right-hand side. This doesn't help me a lot because this is last week's. My parsha is Va'era, and this week's parsha is Bo. And I start reading the parsha Bo without the tamim, and even now standing before you, I get goosebumps. Why? Because the parsha Bo speaks about the last plagues and the Exodus. And imagine how I feel, the man from Jerusalem, standing in this small synagogue, surrounded by black Jews, in a small Jewish village, in the midst of the heart of Africa, and I'm reading about Exodus. After prayers, every Shabbat, in every Jewish village, every Jewish family used to bring the Shabbat bread, which is not called challah, but benekete from the word bracha, and homemade beer. You will have to drink it. Homemade beer, which is called tella, and not wine to be blessed by the rabbis, by the cassim. So I'm stepping out of the synagogue, which is a bit above the compound, and I see the whole village standing, holding the bread and the beer, family by family, looking at me as if I'm at least the deputy Messiah. People just come in order to touch me. They ask me, how is Jerusalem? And while we are standing in this big crowd, all of a sudden, a young man takes me by the sleeve, leading me out of the crowd, looking back at the two people that we got from the Ministry of Tourism, the guide and the driver, whom he knows and I know, are no guide, no driver. This is a communist regime at that time. Those are security people who will report in the evening to their superiors, with whom did we speak longer, to whom did we give an envelope. So knowing that, he takes me behind the synagogue, and after he's convinced that we are alone, he asks me in a very unusual way of Hebrew, Matai ve'ech nelecha. This is January 86, exactly 1 year after we finished Operation Moses, by which we took at the end of 84 into the beginning of 85, 6,364 Ethiopian Jews as refugees who were in the refugee camps in Sudan. I don't know if you remember, this operation was, this is mine now. I have to shouldn't happen to me. I don't know if you remember, but this operation was abruptly stopped because, as you will know, our politicians don't know when to shut up. In this case, the one who didn't shut up was our then Prime Minister, then President, Shimon Peres, and the operation stopped 3 days before it would have finished bringing the Jewish refugees from Sudan. As a matter of fact, the 600 Jews who were trapped in Sudan in the beginning of '85 were brought out in the end of March '85 by the Americans, who did a special operation with the permission of the Sudanese government. They called it Lonely Wolf, we call it Operation Joshua or Operation Queen of Sheba. Anyhow, the 600 people arrived here, those who were trapped. But the fact that it was publicized all over the world caused that all the Mossad people who were active in Sudan, an enemy country to Israel, up to date, had to leave. And therefore, before going a year later, January '86, to Ethiopia, I was summoned to the headquarters of the Mossad, and they gave me very strict orders to tell all the Jews that I meet, all the Jews in the villages, and ask them to spread the word all over the Jewish villages, not to go yet to Sudan again. So this young man is expecting me to tell him to go, and I say to him, the time hasn't yet come, there's still no way. I was very disappointed with him. He didn't wait too long. A few months later, after the messages came from Sudan that there are already Israelis there, they didn't say that there are Israelis, but you can go. There will be people who will take care of you. He organized a group of young men and women, and he went to Sudan. And when I say he went to Sudan, he didn't hitchhike with his group or take a bus. They had to walk. And walk means in this area, and when you go home, you can Google northern Ethiopia. It's a very mountainous area. They had to go for, in this case, about 120 miles, but in other cases, over 200 miles during the nights, because it was illegal to leave Ethiopia, and cross several chains of mountains, and do it, as I said, during the nights, not because it was too hot. Ethiopia, northern Ethiopia, you will enjoy it, is the country where there is eternal spring, all year long, spring. So not because of the heat, because it was illegal, as I said. And after 3 weeks of hardships, they don't reach a picnic place or a hotel, they get to a refugee camp with hundreds and thousands of tents. People dying in big numbers every day. And after several months of waiting in one of the less known operations, now you can already see some videos of it on television, on YouTube, but a few years ago it was not publicized yet. On one of the less known operations, still, when two C-130s land in a desert strip in Sudan, and the Mossad people who re-established themselves in Sudan are taking on 2 trucks. I admit, 2 big trucks. How many people can you put on 2 big trucks? Give me numbers.
154.
154 on 2 trucks. Go up. 154 on 2 trucks.
613.
No, this is so much. Okay.
On each truck.
400 on 2 trucks. And after hours of driving into the desert, where those C-130s are waiting, and they got the orders, the pilots got the orders not to stop engines so they can take off right away. Now it's night, these are C-130s, 4 big propellers, make a lot of noise and a lot of dust, and the opening of the C-130 is in the back, it's illuminated. When I wrote my book on Wings of Eagles, I met a lot of Ethiopians, and we had 17 operations like that. in the 80s, and many came on an operation like that. I asked them, how do you remember that night? Many of them said we were asked to go into the mouth of a dragon. This is how it sounds and this is how it looks. And by the way, the first operation like that, people spread all over. They were afraid. And our people, both from the Air Force and the Mossad, had to recollect them. Then we learned that next time we would put just a rope around the group getting out of the truck and then take them as a group into one of the waiting C-130. 3.5 hours later, they are here. This young man, whom I met in the village, has in the meantime finished the technical college in Beersheba and now is serving as a professional in the IDF, like him. And this is my message to you. 20,000 Ethiopian Jews, out of their own, what they call out their own guts, without having shlichim sent to them and encouraging them to come to Israel, out of their own initiative, left their homes, their fields, their friends, and members of their families, and went to Sudan. And even those among them who were caught by the government, by the police, by the military, and they were brought before a judge who warned them, saying, if you are caught again going to Sudan, you will be hanged. Nevertheless, they did it again. For me, what they did, and they buried thousands of their family members in Sudan, for me, this is a very strong, a very poor proof, but a very strong proof for their Zionism. I don't know another Jewish community in the world that was ready to pay such a high price in people's lives just in order to return to Jerusalem. Therefore, I decided to commit my life to bringing the Ethiopian Jews to Israel and help them being absorbed into Israeli society. I was part, as you have heard, of Operation Solomon. For me, it was very important because it gave me the chance to bring parents to their children, and children to their parents, and brothers to their brothers and sisters, and even spouses, to reunite spouses, because, as I said, they left members of their families in Ethiopia when they came on Operation Moses to Israel. So this was my humanitarian mission, to get those families back together, and therefore I enjoyed very much, although we worked for 16 months, very hard. You will not see it anymore. The people who run the embassy, as all over the world, are the security. They tell you when we close, then it's finished. Those people who were in charge of security, the security officers, understood, as well as all the others, including the ambassador, that this is our mission. And we worked Shabbat, and we worked Sunday, and whenever I asked the embassy to open, the security opened it, even overnight. So this was our mission, and my personal obligation, I could say, was to reunite those families. Today I am very happy that I can continue some kind of humanitarian work with the Ethiopian community in Israel, working with the SELA, Israel Crisis Management Center, that takes care of new immigrants who went through any kind of tragedy, not only from Ethiopia. I'm in charge of the Ethiopian part, but SELA takes care of Olim from all over the world that were stricken by tragedy. I will just tell you one story of one girl who came to Israel as an orphan. She neither knows her father nor her mother. Her father left when her mother was pregnant, and her mother died at labor. She came to Israel when she was 5.5 years old with her aunt and her aunt's family, and they went to Mevaseret Zion, the absorption center not far from here, and whenever orphans arrived in Israel to absorption centers or to permanent housing, social workers notify us. And we were notified, we went to see the aunt, her husband, children, and our girl. And for several years she was part of a group of orphans that we took care of. And as you know, things happen and new orphans arrive and new tragedies unfortunately happen. So after a few years, we departed. And then I get a phone call years later, 10 years later, from a director of a boarding school. And he says to me, I have here a girl that recognized you when she saw the movie on Operation Solomon. And she said, I know him, and I want to speak to him. And I said, okay, no problem, I will come. And then he gave me some background. He said, this girl, now almost 16 years old, drinks, smokes, is anorectic, and she wants to speak to you. She doesn't go to school almost no day. With that preparation, I see her. She reminds me who she is. And we talk about 1.5 hours. And then at the end of the meeting, I ask her, okay, her name is Waded. I invited her to come, but she couldn't make it. You will hear why she could, maybe she could have come, but unfortunately she can't. So at the end of the talk, I ask her, because what she tells me about being deserted by her aunt and other things, is there no one in the world that loves you? And she says, I don't know what love means. I cried. And going home, I decided I will show her what love means. And since then, she's like my real daughter. Just to give you an example how Sela helped in this case, a few weeks later, she had to pass Bagrut in math. And I said to her, what then? Next week, you have your first exam in math. You are going. She said, no way. I've never been to math class. I can't do it. So I said, okay, wait. I went to the principal of the whole village, and I said to him, listen, next week, please give us permission that she will not go to any other class. And we from Sela will pay a private tutor for her for a whole week. He said, no problem. I went to her and I convinced her to do it. She finished Bagrut in mathematics, first Efes Echad, it's only the first exam, 100. She got Bagrut Melea, full matriculation. She went to the IDF serving as a policewoman here in Jerusalem. And then she was on the edge of leaving the army, and she got, the proposal from the police to become part of the police force that takes care of the security on the light train. So she's serving, but today she's serving until 10 p.m. Therefore she couldn't come. I wanted her to come and meet with you. Now she has a boyfriend and she has plans to study. Doing that for a girl like that could finish in the gutters. This is what we do. And you don't have to have too many means. You have to know that your work is important. And some days I come home and my wife asks me, what did you do today? So I went to a funeral. I went to a shul. I went to a hospital. I went also to Brit. And I say to my wife, and she says, how was your day? I say, I enjoyed my day. So sometimes she says, you must be crazy. someone who goes to a funeral, to Shiva, to a hospital, and he says at the end of the day that he enjoys his day, he must be crazy. No. If you look at those people's eyes and you see how important your involvement in their lives is, you can enjoy it, in spite of what you see. So this is what we do, and this is what I wanted to convey to you. I don't know if it's usual to take questions. If you have time, I'm ready to take.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
First of all, incredible talk. Really, I personally, and I think everybody really appreciate what you said tonight and what you've done. I was in Ethiopia 2 weeks ago on the way to South Africa. So, but I know the people and I spent time there as well. How come my question is, how come the Israeli Air Force didn't go into Ethiopia instead of Sudan and land in? Wouldn't it have been much easier?
Okay, Ethiopia is a much more controlled country than Sudan. Sudan is big, and the central government doesn't really have control on the southern part. Secondly, the regime was very strict. It was under communist, Soviet, Eastern Europe, Cuba, like they had their experts, and we couldn't do it. So this was the way to do it, and as I said, the Ethiopian Jews, out of their own initiative, decided to go this way, because this was also the only way to get out of Ethiopia at that time, because the border is a river without a real border. Yes?
Yes, thank you very much, Micha. For all the attraction of Zion affecting for 3,000 years the Jews of Ethiopia, there was also the push, anti-Semitism. We had a talk last week on anti-Semitism here. Can you say something about Ethiopian anti-Semitism?
There's a very special way of anti-Semitism, but you have to understand the Ethiopia, the Ethiopians put honor, respect above life. Therefore you have vendetta, for example, in Ethiopia still. So Ethiopian Jews are part of this culture. Again, for them, honor is more important than life. Okay? Now the Ethiopian Jews were called by the Christians Buddha. Buddha is not the one who sits like that, but Buddha in the terms in Ethiopia means someone who eats you. Not a cannibal, but he eats you symbolically. They believe that the Jews have evil eye. And if a Jew wants you to become sick, he looks at you and you become sick. And this they call he ate him. Now, when a Christian falls sick, his family asks him, literally, who ate you? And he is supposed to say the name of a Jewish neighbor. And then this Jew would be called by this man's family, and he would be asked to forgive him, because they suppose that he was angry with him, and therefore he ate him. So now he will forgive him, and then everything will be okay. The Jew, what a prayer does he have? He comes and he says, I forgive you, and you may stand on your own feet and recover and be okay. And then he goes home and asks the rabbi, the cast, to pray for this boy, so he will really recover. Because if he dies, they will say he didn't really forgive him. So for us, it's very weird. But this is the kind of anti-Semitism in a country where you put honor, respect above life. Another reason, which is an economic reason, Ethiopian Jews, until the communists came, this was the good part with the communists, until the communists took over, Jews were not allowed to own land. So in an agricultural country, if you are not allowed to own land and you have to rent land from the landlords and pay up to half of the harvest to this landlord, you are doomed to be the poorest of the poor. So this was the situation of the Ethiopian Jews. And on top of it was this love to Jerusalem. So altogether brought them to do this move to Sudan and then to Addis Ababa in the 90s. But this is the kind of anti-Semitism in Ethiopia.
Thank you.
Could you comment on the difference between the first Ethiopian groups who were Jewish and the Falasha?
No. Falasha is a derogative name for the Jews, Beta Israel. The second group that you mean is the Pelasmura or Falashamura.
Yes.
Okay. Beta Israel are Jews who kept their Judaism in spite of the active work of the missionaries, in spite of the pressure that was put on them to become Christian. Those are about 50,000 people who came between 1979 until 91, until 90 it was via Sudan mostly, and then in the early 90s, between 90 and 93, the end of 93, and then a small group in 98, 99. These are 50,000 Beta Israel people who kept their Judaism in spite of all the pressure. Between 94 and 97, and then since 2000 until today, almost all who came, and altogether it's another 43,000, are descendants of Jews whose ancestors converted to Christianity voluntarily. Very important for the law of return, voluntarily, in order to improve their situation and get land and get married with Christians so they can get land. It didn't really work. The Christian church embraced them. The best proof of the embracement by the church is that many of the descendants of converted Jews became priests in churches that served the whole area, not only the group of the Pelasmura. They were priests who served the entire area, all the Christians there. But when it came to what the converted Jews hoped for, to getting married with Christians, they said, okay, you have Falasha blood. You have still maybe evil eye, so we don't want to marry you. So they got stuck between the Jews, who looked at them as traitors, and the Christians, who embraced them in the church, but not really socially, or for marriage reasons. And then another fact that I have to introduce to you is that in Ethiopia, both Jewish and Christian, you are not allowed to marry within 7 generations of your own clan. Okay, 7 generations. It's a big group, thousands of people that you are not allowed to marry. Now, why is it important? Because it's a taboo. You need to know all your relatives 7 generations away. And this brings not this knowledge. It's not knowledge per se, but it brings with it responsibility for those in your clan that need help. So, some of them arrived in Israel, Beta Israel. They have Pelasmura relatives, some 4 or 5 generations away from them. And those are writing to them and telling them, we are starving, we are suffering, help us. So here starts the pressure that came from the group and from American Jews as well. To bring, and the American Jews that were involved were very messianic. You know the halacha that says, Israel aval pi shechata Israelu. A Jew can never cease being a Jew. And those messianic not Christian Messianic, Jewish Messianic, believed that you have to get all the Jews here, even if they are descendants of converts. So this was the pressure from both sides, and our government decided in the mid-90s or even earlier to allow those who have first-grade relatives and then who had a maternal lineage to a descendant ancestor, a woman that was still buried many years ago in a Jewish cemetery. If they have a maternal lineage, the family that could show that would come. So all together with first relatives and then with this maternal lineage, we brought 43,000 of the Palestinians. And there is a gap between the two groups in Israel. This is one of the problems that we face within the community in Israel, at least the older ones. The younger ones fall in love, but the older ones remember that those are descendants of traitors. Some of them even denounced them to the authorities when they passed to Sudan, close to a Palestinian village. So this is an issue that is not really solved. It will be solved when the old people pass away. So this is the situation. Today when I went to Shloshim in Kiryat Malachi, and I met the older ones, those who came in the early 80s, and we spoke about the Palestinian, they said, don't believe them. They said to me, don't believe them. And I said, I was against bringing them to Israel on those two committees that took place on this issue when they asked me. But then they decided what they have decided. And I was afraid, because I'm not religious, but I'm a Zionist. I was afraid that they will not really identify with the state of Israel. And I said, when I said that, I said, I hope that I'm mistaken. I still don't know if I'm mistaken. Because through Cell, I'm working almost only with Palestinians today, because they were the last to come. And I see among them what I didn't expect to happen. Young people going to combat units, studying, committing themselves. So I said, I hope that I'm mistaken when I met, on those committees when they asked me. I'm not fully sure that I've been mistaken, but there's a chance that I was mistaken, and I love it. If I'm mistaken, I'll be very happy.
One friend who, one friend who visited Ethiopia and is very concerned about Jews and Judaism, she felt there were sort of two ends of a spectrum of the name of the non-original Ethiopian Jews, that they is a group that sort of comes because it's a way of economic advancement to come to Israel. People who come from subsistence farming, in a sense, they're not the Middle Ages, but not too far beyond. And that...
You're right, Middle Ages.
And
Allow with 2 oxen.
Pardon me?
Allow with 2 oxen is Middle Ages.
And the dilemma seems to be that in terms of that want to come now, there's a question of not the first ones, but the ones left in Ethiopia now are they just looking for economic advancement, which is fine for everyone to do, but in terms of Israel taking in people and trying to get have enough funds to assist them to be strong. How do you see the?
This is exactly what I said in other words. But on the other hand, my conclusion of the situation, because we are now talking about a small group that is left, maybe we should finish it by doing it, unless it is not the last group, which is always the question.
The prop is open. There's always the last group,
Yes,
and then there are
yes,
people.
no, I understand what you are saying,
Uh-huh.
but I want to add something else. You know, I told you that in 92, 93, when there were two committees convening and debating this question, and this was a minister committee, 5 ministers and the head of the Jewish agency, they decided to start bringing them, as I told you I was against it. But the moment they arrived here, and in the last years 43,000 of them arrived, they lacked the Jewish roots that the Beta Israel came with. So my conclusion for this situation as we are now in, we should invest in them even more than we invested in the Jews who have these Jewish roots. Because if we don't do it, they will really become alienated and they will maybe end where I fear that they will end, not identifying with Israel as their own country. So now they are here. So our mission is to get them really into Jewish Israeli society.
Thank you, and happy Wednesday.
Maybe I just will print, I know that you want to give me a piece of paper. My last words, I always try to finish with those last words. You know, after Operation Solomon, I was very famous for a week, not longer in Israel, it doesn't take long. And everyone would stop me on the street, journalists and simple people, and they would ask me questions because everyone recognized me from television. And the question that repeated itself all the time was, how did you feel? Now the truth of the matter is, when you do an intense job, you don't feel. And when I arrived in Israel after Operation Solomon, I didn't sleep for 2 nights, I didn't eat for 2 days. My blue shirt became brown because of sweat and dirt. You could imagine that I couldn't feel. The feelings come later. And to me, the feelings came 3 weeks later, far from Israel and far from Ethiopia, on German soil. I'm the son of German Jews who made it out of Germany last minute, August 39th. My parents left Germany for Belgium. And again last minute, March 1940, just before the Germans conquered Belgium, my parents made it to Palestine. And I was born here. But then after my bar mitzvah, against my understanding and against my will, my parents returned to Germany. I went to a German high school. I speak German as well as I speak English. And therefore, 3 weeks after the operation, I was sent to Germany to speak with the Jews there about their contribution to the absorption of the Ethiopian Jews. We arrived at Munich airport at noon. A colonel of the Israeli Air Force, who was a C-130 squadron commander, a social worker of Ethiopian origin, who was working with me in Addis, and myself. We were scheduled to speak with the Jews in Munich at 8 p.m. We had 8 hours time in Munich. You know what Israelis usually do when they have some spare hours in Munich? They go shopping. We decided not to go shopping. We decided to go to Dachau. And there in Dachau it struck us. We understood the significance of that operation, not to the Jews whom we had to get to Israel, to us. We understood the essence of the existence of the state of Israel. We understood, and I know in history you don't play with the word if, but you understand that if Israel would have been founded just 10 years before it was founded, there wouldn't be an Auschwitz. Standing on this blood-filled soil of Dachau, looking at the crematorium, I said to myself, everyone is thanking you, it should be the other way around. You should thank God and the people that have sent you to Ethiopia, and in the first place to the Ethiopian Jews who did this move. You have to thank them, because everyone can read history, some people can even write history. I got my chance of being part of history making. Thank you.
Micha, you spoke about the times of not being able to feel, and despite working with you at Sarah, I can tell you that I'm overwhelmed with feeling.
So you are. So,
So
Thank you.
I thank you personally for your words and in the name of everybody here.
thank you.
And I can relate strongly to what you say about wanting to thank them. I think every time I do something for one of the families in Sela and they thank me, I really want to say to them, thank you for the, sounds kind of silly, but for the opportunity to be facilitating something useful, happy for them. So,
And they love you, so it's okay.
and I love that too. So in the tradition of Rotary, a tree has been planted in
Okay.
Maine, and Paul Harris Peace Forest.
Thank you.
And
And
thank you.
show it to the camera.
I hope they really put a plant and don't put it in the director's pocket.
It's every other tree.
This one is planted.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.